Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. If you don't know us already, we are your restaurant accountants. We've been specialized in restaurant accounting for over 30 years. Paperchase is a global company, and so we're proud to serve restaurants of all types and sizes across the globe. So we have fast food businesses, we have small chef-driven concepts, and we have larger fine dining restaurants. But what really unites all of these different clients is that they have an ambition to grow. And so, similarly, we're interested in helping our clients' employees grow their own careers. Through our experience, we've found that when we are able to teach our clients' employees about finance, they in turn do better in their positions and then do better in their careers. So we truly believe that in this Zoom room today with us are the future restaurant owners, future GMs, future bar directors. And finance at the end of the day is really essential for growing your career, whether it be in the restaurant industry or beyond. So we hope that you'll take some of these learnings away with you. Just to go into our agenda today, our focus will be on kind of back of house finance, so kitchen finance essentially. We'll be introducing the concept of cost of goods sold, and we'll be talking about what are some areas where you can examine to lower your cost of goods sold. There's a lot of things that hide behind the numbers, and so we'll be discussing those. We'll also be going into recipe costing. We'll be doing a short recipe costing exercise together. And then we'll also talk about benchmarking, right? Where should you be for your cost of goods sold at your restaurant? And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the session, you can go ahead and raise your hand. And if we have a chance, we'll get to it. But if not, I'll call on you after we get to the Q&A session. And that will be a totally open question and answer session. You'll be able to ask anything that you want to. It doesn't have to necessarily do with the topics that we're discussing today, but really just to kind of ask your accountant kind of session. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my boss, Nish. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Everyone's super excited for this particular session. My name is Nish. I joined Paperchase in 2007 and started the US operations in 2010. Born and brought up in India, did my studies in London, and moved to 2010. And since then, just trying to help restaurant thrive and be successful in whatever they do. Looking forward to have a fireside chat.
Thank you, Nish. Thank you, Caroline. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this lovely morning for our second session of restaurant finance. As Caroline and Nish mentioned, my name is Ruhel. I've been with Paperchase for almost 8 years now. Prior to Paperchase, while I was still pursuing my degree in accounting, I was working at various restaurants and nightclubs all across New York. So I do come with a little bit of experience in both sides. Again, we're excited to have you here today. And without further ado, all right. So cost of goods sold, COGS, otherwise known as cost of goods sold, right? What is cost of goods sold? Cost of goods sold is how much it's costing you to make what you're selling, right? If you're a bar, obviously it could be a cocktail. If you're a restaurant, of course, like most of you are here, it can be a combination of both, right? But how do we derive to that cost of goods sold is what we want to get into today. So what we do is we take the value of your ending inventory from prior month, we add all the new purchases, plus we take in and then we subtract the closing inventory, which you take at the end of the current month and minus any other adjustments. And we divide that by total revenue, right? So essentially the formula is pretty simple. It's closing inventory plus new purchases, closing inventory from prior month plus new purchases minus closing inventory minus adjustments divided by revenue for the same period. And that gives you your total cost of goods sold, which is going to be a dollar amount, and you sort of divide that by total revenue to get the percentage that you're trying to achieve, right? Again, the gross profit and benchmark is something that we're going to go over later on in the slide, but we just wanted to introduce cost of goods sold here so we can continue. Another thing that I just wanted to really quickly touch up on here was the adjustments aspect of it. Adjustments, again, you may ask yourself, what is adjustments? Adjustments is anything, for example, if something is being transferred from the kitchen to the bar to the kitchen, or, yielding or any portion cutting after butcher cuts, you get the yield. So any type or any spoilage, right, or item that has been damaged, etc. So those we consider adjustments because that have to be obviously taken off the inventory and it's not going to be counted. So that's just the final piece here. All right. So let's sharpen our knives. We all want to conquer our high F&B cost, right? So high F&B cost is definitely it's a chronic problem, right? It's not just you, it's a lot of restaurant people are facing the same issues. And we want to be able to help you get that, right? But before we can help you do it, you need to be able to help yourselves to be able to get to that point, right? So in order to do that, let's look at some of the areas where we can obviously improve on to make sure that we get, our cost of goods sold down and our efficiency up and our gross profit also up, right? So these are 4 key areas that we're going to be touching up on this presentation here today. One being recipe costing, accurate inventory, menu pricing, and also internal controls. So we're going to take a deep dive into each one of these topics separately, and then we'll go more into it in the following slide. So let's start with internal controls. So internal controls are essentially, we're breaking this down into 3 segments, right? One is weighing and receiving. So when you receive products at a restaurant, you usually have somebody receiving the products for you, right? You don't want the vendor to come in, drop the products and leave with the invoice on top of the product and just be gone. That's really not a good practice because you want to make sure that you're going to that invoice, making sure that all the items that you ordered that you're paying for is 1, has been received, and 2, the quantity is also correct, right? 3, nothing is damaged. So you want to ensure that you are actually receiving all the items that you're paying for. This may look like a small problem, but it's really not. Trust me, you want to make sure because a lot of times vendors leave items that are damaged. You don't realize it till about a week later. And then, it's a back and forth with the vendor trying to get a credit, right? Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, but it's better to stay on top of it at the time of delivery. Another key area of control is planning purchases, right? Planning purchases is something that you want to make sure that you do consistently week over week, month over month. You always want to plan ahead. You want to know what the weather is going to be like before you make a significant purchase, right? How many covers you're expecting for the week, if there are any events around the neighborhood that you need to plan for, right? It's okay to sometimes run out of product because you're selling it so much, right? Then to have it sitting in your shelves and then going bad, right? Because that's just money lost. There's no way to get anything out of it. However, if you run out of a product, a customer may want to get something else. They're not going to not get anything whatsoever. They're probably going to end up with getting something else. So planning your purchase is a big item here. Also at the same time, you do not want to burn through your cash flow. Cash is king. We know that, right? So you want to hold on to your cash as much as possible instead of having the cash be, sitting in your shelves, right? Also that, it can go bad, right? So you want to make sure that you're always planning ahead and purchasing accordingly. Third, but not least here is the butcher portion yield, right? So essentially, this is a labor-intensive measure, but it tells you exactly what kind of yield you're getting from an item, right? So say, for example, you order a 8-ounce cut of meat, right? Or steak rather, but you only use 6 to create the item on the menu, 6 ounce. You only need the 6 ounces of meat. So the additional 2, either you're going to make something with it or it's going to be thrown away, whatever the case is, right? So you want to make sure that your butcher is writing down, weighting the materials before doing the cutting, right? So this way you understand what the exact yield is, and you can obviously plan your purchases around it. If the cut of the meat is too large, too small, or anything else, you can let the vendor know, hey, you're looking for a different cut, etc. Right? So knowing what the percentage is there is definitely a good indicator as well. So again, these are just some key internal controls that we definitely want to make sure that we stay on top of to be able to make sure that we are operating a smoother operation, also an efficient operation. All right. So let's move on to the next slide here.
And also I think I would give Ruel, thank you for putting it through detail. So I'll give a couple of examples on portion, right? Like why it is so important in the business. And sometimes everyone says like, okay, my food cost should be 30%, 27%, or beverage cost, but then no one talks about the portion. So we have a couple of examples which we have gone through with our clients. So we have one client in Miami, very successful, and they had a high food cost. They're big on seafood, and they had a high food cost. But the theoretical cost always showed that it should be around 29 to 30% food cost is easily achievable. And there were like 5 or 6 weeks continuously, their food cost went up to around 33% to 34%. Now, someone say like, yeah, it's only 4 weeks, 3%, 4% food cost, it is not a big deal. But if you are doing $20 million a year revenue from one restaurant, and out of it, half of it is food, 3-4% annually will be almost $300,000 plus in terms of a bottom line impact. So it is a significant thing. So anyway, so we implemented every single controls that okay, you have to implement butcher log, you have to implement receiving log, you have to implement portion control. And they did little bit yes and no. And then I was actually with the owner in the restaurant. We ordered the lunch, and apparently we ordered both of us, we ordered main course as a sea bass. And when the sea bass arrived, my portion was as much as probably 12 to 13 ounce, and her portion was also around 11 ounce. And I look at that dish, I'm like, this is big. I mean, and then I asked the owner, I'm like, is this the portion you have? And she's like, no, this is not the portion we have. And then we said, like, let's go in the kitchen, let's weigh every single sea bass fillet which you have done today morning, and wait. And to our surprise, most of the fillet were like more than 9.5 ounce and above. And there were few which were like 6 or 7 ounce, which is also not good, because you want to give your clients or our clients like consistent experience. And the moment we fixed that problem, the food cost went back to what it should be. And the reason was they had a new butcher just before 2 months. So numbers don't lie. Numbers are black and white. It's not a gray. If you keep on asking a question, you will always get to the bottom of it. I have one more example to share on the portion. And again, portion is the key here as much as anything else on the screen. Another client outside of US, we did not even talk about portion, but we noticed something where their sushi sales was going down. And after like 3 months or so, we said like, hey, for some reason your sushi sale percentage towards your total food cost has gone down. And they're like, interesting. So the executive chef, he went back, he looked into it, and he said, yes, we hired a new sushi chef, and he started putting more rice on the sushi when he rolled. So people were getting filled up. That started declining the revenue. So again, it has nothing to do with the cost, but this is how you lose your top line, which will eventually affect the bottom line. And third thing, not an example, but the most important thing also on the screen is the weighing and receiving, which most of us forget because we assume everything is in place. Do not assume. In accounting, we call it trust but verify. If I do something, Ruhel can trust me, but he should verify, and vice versa. And the same way, you should treat your, delivery people, your receiving guys. Once in a while, go early in the morning, check it whether the systems are in place or not. And you will find where there is a leakage if you are getting affected by a high food cost or high, beverage cost. So those are the three, very quick, points on this slide, Rohel.
Yes. Well, thank you for that, Nish. Thank you for the examples as well. So yeah, so obviously those internal controls is something that we want to focus on a lot. But in addition to that, there are other factors as well, right? So are your purchases being accounted? So we are the accountants. We often do things as we're told, especially when it comes to chart of accounts, right? Chart of accounts are essentially you, the operators. Obviously we created, we know what it is. We provide with the standardized Paperchase format, for example, right? However, you still have a lot of say in how you want to categorize it, what you want, where, etc. Right? So knowing what the chart of accounts are is definitely something that you want to do. At the same time, you want to know how we're also categorizing those expenses on your behalf. So in addition to that, we also want to talk about some of the things that you can do to ensure that you're also doing the proper thing in terms of categorizing things yourselves, right? It starts off with auditing your POS. Why do we say that? Auditing your POS is definitely important because, say, for example, you add a new item to the menu, right? And you're going to include that item on the POS because that's exactly where it's going to go in order for you to punch in the cells. Again, you want to audit it because one, you want to make sure that it's being categorized properly, right? So it's not a food item that's being allocated as alcohol, or alcohol item, liquor item being categorized as wine, right? Because if it's a liquor item being categorized as wine, then it's going to throw off your liquor sales and wine sales. It's going to be inflating one and deflating another, right? And you're also going to have purchases and expenses that go along with that, obviously selling that product, right? So it's not going to only just throw off your revenue, it's also going to throw off your cost of goods sold as well. So a good rule of thumb is to make sure that you audit your POS at least on a quarterly basis to ensure that something like that is not being overlooked, right? And also this has huge implications on the sales tax, right? Because you want to make sure that whichever new item you're putting on the menu, you're categorizing, you're setting it up properly, so at least you're collecting the proper sales tax on it as well. Our second item here is bulk purchases, right? That we sort of touched up on the previous slide. You also want to make sure that you refrain away from it. You plan accordingly, plan your purchases, and buy accordingly, right? Third here on the list is transfers internally. This happens a lot. This happens all the time, especially if you're a multi-unit restaurant. You may have transfers from one restaurant to another, right? So this you want to make sure that you keep track of. I would suggest, or would suggest, keeping a log, or either the bar does it or the kitchen does it, somebody keeping a log of all the items that are being moved around. So at the end of the month, it gets counted towards the receiving party. So if something goes from the kitchen to the bar should consider that item as part of their inventory, closing inventory as well, right? So that definitely helps. So if it's wine being used for a dish, that goes to the kitchen, etc. And then we have family and staff meals. This is something that we're providing for our staff. We're providing meals when they come in, work at the restaurants prior to pre-shift, they get a family meal, right? So you want to make sure that you're taking the year-end credits for it like you're supposed to. You're obviously entitled to it. So if you have any questions about it, please do reach out to one of us. We'll definitely be able to help you set that up. And the last thing we want to mention here is your tea and coffee costs, right? Unless you are operating as a coffee shop and that's your primary means of generating revenue, which is tea and coffee sales, then tea and for most restaurants, tea and coffee cost and revenue sort of goes overlooked, right? You're not looking at how much, maybe you're looking at the revenue, but you're not looking at the expenses. And even if you see the expenses being a little bit high, you're not paying too much attention to it. You're saying, hey, this is, probably 1% of my net revenue, right? But it adds up, right? The reason why we bring it up here is that it's, although it's something that you obviously generating revenue for, restaurants often carry a higher cost of goods sold when it comes to tea and coffee costs. It's maybe because obviously our people, most of our staff, they're working a long night the night before, coming in early morning, wanting to sip a coffee or a tea for themselves, right? They take a couple of sips, put it aside, forget all about it, and then come remember that they never finished their coffee, come back and make another one, right? So we want to make sure that we train our staff. It's not that you want to obviously micromanage, but you also want to make sure that they understand the value that, of the restaurant, because once they understand that, they'll probably understand a lot more for you going forward, right? So it's just some areas to obviously look into to make sure that we're maximizing on everything that we're purchasing, and nothing is essentially going out the door without our knowledge. All right. So another key area is comps and voids, right? So comps and voids are similar and it gets brought up in a lot of topics together, but they do totally different things, right? So a comp, otherwise known as complimentary, is a cost to the company, right? So it's essentially you giving away an item or a portion of that item for free, whether it be a 20% comp, 50% comp, or full 100% comp for friends and family, etc., right? So this is essentially a free item for the table. It can be because the table was waiting for, on a Saturday night, they were waiting for 45 minutes for a table. You want to comp a round of drinks to the house, you go ahead and do it, right? So it's definitely, is required cost of doing business. We get it, but we want to make sure that we try to keep that comp down, right? Because we don't want to, obviously it's no revenue. We're not generating any revenue. But also at the same time, we're giving away a dish, right? So we want to make sure that we keep that down. Second is spilled dishes and mistakes, right? So if we're spilling dishes, we're making a mistake, we're having to obviously reorder that item, the kitchen refires, they make another dish. It's again 100% cost to us, the business, right? So that comes from training our staff, making sure that everybody knows what they're doing, everybody's obviously following the same protocols. And mistakes are bound to happen, we're all human, right? But it's our job to at least make sure that we limit that to a minimum. Last but not least, when it comes to comps are taxable items, right? So if we're giving over an item for free, we're still being taxed at the purchase price. So for example, if a dish costs $100 and it's costing you $25 to make it, you're being taxed on that $25 based on that purchase price, right? And then we have void, right? Void is essentially an item that was never made, right? So it's canceled before it was made. So for example, a guest comes in, decides to order say a 8-ounce steak, right? And then you realize the kitchen didn't have the steak was 86 essentially. You run back to the guest, you tell them, hey, we apologize, it's a mistake, we just ran out of it. Can you order something else, right? So you go back to the POS, you obviously void that previous transaction or previous item that you ordered, and you go ahead and make another one, right? So these voids are only essentially going to take place if this is something that's adjusted to prior to the item being made, right? So guest changes mind, 86, training or POS tests, etc. So these are some areas where void can also be used. All right. So now on to recipe costing, right? Recipe costing is something that we want to make sure that we stay on top of, right? This is something that you have to obviously start when you first open the restaurant. You make sure that you stay on top of it throughout, right? And you also make sure that you go back periodically to go back and check on it, right? So some rule of thumbs essentially when it comes to recipe costing is you want to measure twice, you want to pour once, right? So whatever you're pouring, you want to make sure that is being measured twice. Like the example that Nish gave earlier, right? With the butcher, instead of a 6-ounce fillet, you're sending out 10-ounce, 11-ounce fillet. You don't want to do that, right? So that measurement has to be done twice, and then you know exactly how much, of the portion that should be going out on the floor to the guests, right? So make sure that, from garnishes to the sauces to everything, right? Everything is being measured before you pour. Once you do your recipe costing, then you want to make sure that your staff is trained. And if somebody new comes into the team, make sure that they understand exactly how, a dish is supposed to be produced. So one, the recipe costing, you're not, taking on additional expenses, but more importantly, you don't want to change the customer experience, right? Because a lot of times you are getting repeat customers, and that is definitely something that's going to weigh heavy on them. So then comes best practices, right? So best practices is essentially making sure that you're going back periodically to go back to your recipe costing to one, look for any inflation, obviously, right? So that pricing must be updated. What you purchased for $8 2 years ago is not $8 anymore, unfortunately, right? So you want to make sure that you go back and you update your recipe costing every quarter per se, if possible. So this will tell you, because ingredients prices change week over week, month over month for sure, right? So we want to make sure that we stay on top of it with our recipe costing as well. So we're getting, the proper margin, or at least the margins that we're hoping to get from an item. And again, you just want to make sure that you stay on top of it, and then you want to price your menu around how much you're exactly, purchasing that item for, right? Also, you also take into consideration labor costs, right? New York, California, minimum wage is essentially going to the roof, right? And everywhere else in America as well. So we want to make sure that we stay on top of it as well. So recipe costing plays a big factor in all of it. All right, and so let's do one together, right? All right, so while Caroline pulls up the Excel sheet, I'll just quickly introduce the Excel sheet and we'll go over it in detail. Thank you, Caroline. So this essentially is, can you just zoom out just a little bit and show the entire page at once? So this is essentially 3 tables that we're going to go over. We'll go over individually, we'll zoom in as well, and we'll tell you what these do, and we'll do one dish together as well. So all right, just can you zoom in on the first? Yep. All right, cool. So the first one here is, if you already know what that food cost, the targeted food cost that you're trying to achieve, and what the selling price is, then you're able to get the margin, right? So for example, the selling price, if you know the food cost is, you want it to be $20, right? And you want the selling price to be 50, you put it in here and you find out how much the gross profit is, right? So this gives you some key indicators, something that we're going to use to later do the actual recipe costing itself. The second table here is if you have a food cost and want to achieve a particular food cost percentage. So if you had the food cost dollar amount and you want to achieve a targeted percentage, you put it in here and it tells you how much you should be selling it for, right? So again, these are just some, metrics that you can play around with to be able to see what you want to achieve. And the third one here is if you have a food cost and want to achieve a certain gross profit. So essentially, it's just three different ways of coming to the same bottom line. One, either gross profit or selling price or the food cost itself. So let's go over to the NY strip. All right. So again, right now in today's age, a lot of these are, you can get this from there's recipe costing softwares available, right? There's inventory management softwares available. So a lot of it comes with the recipe costing. So you may not have to use this Excel sheet. However, if you're not using a third-party software and are using an Excel sheet and you want us to share this with you, we'll be more than happy to do so, right? But let's come back to the New York strip. So let's create a dish here. So for example, we're making a New York strip. We're doing recipe costing for a New York strip. Let's just say 8 ounce, right? And here we need all the ingredients. The ingredients are your beef, your produce, your oil, your non-food lemon juice, and your produce cilantro, right? And the side that comes with the steak is the rice and beans, which is the taco rice. And this gives you, so the B column is all the item names, right? The descriptions. The C column is essentially the unit of measurement, right? How you're purchasing that size, what's the pack size that you're purchasing, right? So the New York strip, we're purchasing in ounce and everything else is in either grams, milligram, or whatever the case might be. So that comes directly from the invoice itself. The size of unit purchase, when you're purchasing this item, what is the unit of measurement that you're purchasing, right? So that's the D column, shows exactly how you're purchasing and the pack size. And the E column is cost of unit purchase, how much is the cost of the unit that you're purchasing, right? So it's $13 for the New York strip, for example, right? And the F column is the smallest unit of measure. So that's what so that's essentially how much you're gonna need, right? How much is the actual price that you're paying for each ounce that you're purchasing? And the G column is how much you're gonna need in order to create this dish, right? So you're gonna need 12 ounces of the New York strip. So that gives you a net price of $9.94, for example, right? And it's down down all the columns, same process, and how you derive to a cost of $10.81. So that includes the rice and beans as well. So essentially, total cost per batch is $10.81. That's how much it's costing you to produce this dish, right? How much you want to sell it. The proposed selling price is $43.24 because you want to you want the food cost to be 25%, right? And the gross profit to be 75. You can take this dollar amount now, which is the cost at $10.81, to the first sheet, play around with it, see what number you want to achieve, right? Whether it be a 25% food cost, 22% food cost, 20% food cost, right? So this way you're able to put together a menu item and understand what the pricing should be and, essentially, put on the menu, hopefully. All right. So I think that covers this slide. And yeah, and again, like I said earlier in my presentation, if anybody wants to take a look at this sheet or you feel like it's going to be helpful to you or anyone in the restaurant, please let us know. We'll be happy to provide you with it. So, and again, gross profit, right? You want to find the correct menu price by working backwards, right? You want to work backwards from your gross profit to find the exact menu price. Again, for inflation, right? For high labor costs, all of that, obviously, you want to consider as well. With that being said, I'll hand it off to Nish. And Nish, why don't you talk about a little bit about, benchmarkings and menu pricing?
Absolutely. No, thank you so much, Ruhel, for all the guidance. So everyone, this is, we're going to talk a lot of different topics, but before we start talking about gross profit, when a customer comes in a restaurant, they don't only come for, having a food, having a great service, but you are also showcasing the brand. That how are we thinking about pricing the menu? How are we thinking about, overall brand, what we reflect? So the question is going to be much more deeper. That is not only about like achieving 20% food cost or 30% food cost, because that's what typically investors and accountants talk in a very straight up in a percentage way. However, no one talks about the cash margin, because sometimes you might have an expensive dish which is going to have a higher food cost or higher beverage cost versus having a blanket rule of having a 30% food cost. So we'll be tackling all those different things. So now let's talk about gross profit. Gross profit, it's like I mentioned, there's a cash margin versus theoretical food cost. So typically the rule of the thumb is your food cost should be 30%, or your beverage liquor cost should be 18 to 22%, and your wine cost should be 28%. However, there are times in a weeks where your food cost might be high, or your mainly wine cost will be high, because you sold a bottle of Don Perignon for which the cost might be 40% or 42%, which is totally fine. So you don't suddenly call 911 situation that, oh, we have a problem. You always analyze what are you selling, what are the SKUs, what you have sold, in order to really understand that how the gross profit is made of. The second thing is, whenever you price the menu, do the spread, especially for the beverage. What is your cheapest one and what is your most expensive one? So you are creating the selling price, which will derive your gross profit in a way, without going into a zone where we becoming too expensive or we are becoming too cheap, and then we are not able to get the average check what we are supposed to. Also, when you're opening a new restaurant, which some of you will be opening soon, this is going to become a key part of the menu, is the menu pricing. How are you pricing the menu? We have clients where we have seen suddenly you have bottle of wines of 60 $70, and then nothing in between, and then it goes to 150 plus thing, and then you are losing the upselling of 120 $130 wine bottles in order to increase the average check as well. So it is important about the strategy on how we price the thing. For food, there are two or three different takes on this. One of it is, if you have a dish which is absolutely heavy looking and heavy on the carbs, you potentially will lose a way to sell an additional dessert or extra a side as well. So make sure you balance it in a way that if you are putting a lot of things on a plate, and then because of that your gross profit for that particular plate is, let's say, or cost is 32% or 33%, instead of that, remove one thing, reduce the price, and then sell it as an entire side, or possibly have possibly have dessert add on. Another way to do it, which we do sometimes, and talk to the client, is go in a dishwashing area once in a while, and see if there is a particular dish comes back in a dishwashing area which is not finished. And that is your answer to the question, that why are you not able to sell a lot of dessert or pastries in the end, because that's again a part of experience. And if a particular dish or a two are coming back not finished completely or 90%, that's what your answer is, that, oh, we are losing a potential to do an upselling right over here. So that is another critical thing which you can think about it. Wastage is very critical. So again, menu price, like what Ruhel just showed about recipe costing, it is super critical. If you are not going to, when you do a theoretical price, you have like, okay, we're gonna get a whole salmon, we're gonna trim, 30% goes in the wastage, and remaining we're going to cut it in a 8-ounce pieces, and that's what our yield is. If you do not get the right quality from the supplier, if you do not get the right butcher who is butchering the fish properly, you're going to get affected on the gross profit immediately. So be very careful on that. For some of our clients where they are like a luxury concepts, like I mean, as an example, it can be baguette, sea spice, just as a figure of speech. I think the way to analyze the wine cost and champagne cost is not just to do a one blanket analysis. Instead of that, separate it out by price point, like $0 to $150, $150 to $300, and $300 and above, because all those three slabs will have a different costing associated to it. 0 to 150 might have 22% cost for the wine and champagne, while 150 to 300 might have 30%, and 300 above will have 35-40% plus. Again, do not hang on to just 1% as a number. Look at the cash margin. It's better to sell Wagyu A5 or a caviar or a Don Perignon than trying to sell something else which is not going to bring a lot of cash. And that's what accountants and investors don't talk about, the cash margin versus percentage margin. Tea and coffee is again a good example, which Ruhel gave earlier, that doing those small tweaks is going to make you that extra 0.5% net profit, 1% net profit. And a lot of this small levers you can pull in the industry is going to add on. So that's gross profit quickly, and then you have industry benchmarks. This is what we have seen across the world. Some of you might be from Europe, so we also have put gross profit number and not only COGS. But fast casual is between 22 to 24%. Casual restaurant will be around 28 to 30%. Fine dining, 30 to 35%. 35% in a very, very rare case. When you are running a restaurant like Noma as an example, then your food cost might not be at 30%. It will be very well close to 35% just for the reasons. Or if you do a high-end sushi, where the food per person average check is $600-$700, you will not get 30% food cost also there. And then you have a cocktail bars and wine bars, which will be anywhere between 20 to 22%. Wine will be slightly higher as well. And then the last point on this slide is adjust. So be wary of substituting items, stick to your recipe costing, and if purchasing changes, change the menu price. And seasonal item is also important. One advice which I have for adjust is, depending on the volume of the food or beverage you do, you want to consider bulk purchases as well. So definitely it blocks the cash. But if you play it well, some of our clients, what they have done, give an example. Let's say, you are selling black gourd or dumpling, but also you are selling a black gourd as a main course as well. And it is one of your top 5 sellers consistently for last year, 2 and 3. And that is subject to massive, price increase every quarter, every year, because it is limited in supply. One way to do it is, you want to sit down with your supplier, who is probably the wholesaler on that particular thing, and do the forward contract for a year or a 2, and promise a minimum guarantee where they hold the stock or they deliver to you, because then they will actually do a forward contract with their wholesaler. By that way, you're going to get, let's say, 5% savings on your black gourd overall for the next 12 months. That amount will be significant. And again, this 2%, 5% we talk, it doesn't look like a big number. But to give you a simple example, let's say your food revenue is, total revenue is 10 million. Out of it, 7 million is your food sales. And out of 7 million, 1 million comes from black gourd, which is dumpling and main course. Now, saving 5% on 1 million is going to be $50,000 saving. So you have to have an agility to change as it required. And what it will also do, it will help you creating the brand that, okay, this restaurant is somewhere I can go consistently, and I do not have to keep on paying extra money because the black code is getting expensive week over week. And that's how you're going to defend your brand versus competitors. But also you will have a loyal customer, and that loyal customer keeps on coming in. That will help you to get that extra $100, $200 in profit, which you did not have. So definitely adjust as and when it's required, for the menu pricing. All right. So the last slide, thank you, before you go to sleep. Inventory, least favorite topic for the entire audience and the most interesting topic for the accountants. is having an actual and accurate inventory. And it is a backbone to the business. That's how Ruhel started. What is COGS? Opening inventory plus purchases minus cost. And we totally understand, like, some of the restaurants are super busy. The cost models have changed, a lot of things have changed, and doing inventory, it's not possible all the time. However, routine count is important. It's super critical that if you are not doing weekly, which is totally fine, do it bi-weekly. If you're not doing bi-weekly, I suggest do 80/20 rule. Focus on your most expensive items, which is 20% of your total SKUs, and do those inventory at least weekly. Otherwise, if you are going to do it end of the month, and that also not religiously well, you will not know that when you have to fix the problem, because by the time you know the problem, it's already month late, if not 2 months late. Because before you take the decision, you need at least couple of data points or 2 months of consistent, a downward trend in order for you to identify. So do 80/20 rule. Routine counts as well. Tracking is important. What happened last week versus this week in terms of usage. And then you're like, oh, but why did we use 100 lbs of salmon, but we only sold worth of 70 lbs of it? That means it went into the wastage, or there was actual pilferage. I have example on that as well. We had a client which now unfortunately shut down in New York, and their food cost was consistently high. Peruvian restaurant. So we said, like, okay, your food cost should be around 30% to 31%. 7 to 8 weeks consistently, their food cost was around 36% to 38%. Again, the owner calls us. They're like, hey, we need some help. Can you help on identifying? So we implemented a receiving log. So the receiver writes every day how much they weighed when they got from the vendor. Then we implemented a log for the yield. Then they also wrote down the portions, how many portions we got, and everything looked perfect. Like everything, like, oh, now why you still have a high food cost? Your menu price is correct as well, and you have the right people. When you have a right manager, right chef, on the business, you don't need to worry about it. And then we were in a meeting, we asked questions like, hey, what happens when you close? They're like, oh, we have night cleaner comes, it's a third party company. They're like, okay, great. Do you lock your walk-ins and do you lock your freezers? They're like, no, we don't lock those things. And we told them, like, why don't you start locking starting tomorrow? And problem got solved. The food cost went back to 30% within a week just by locking the freezers. And of course, that company got fired as well. But you have to ask questions. Like I said earlier, numbers are black and white. It's not gray. If something doesn't make sense, you have to keep asking questions. Reach out to us. We will help you getting through that journey, that why your cost is high, so that we make you the business of next level in order to expand internationally. But get your basics right: inventory, recipe costing, menu prices. If all of it's correct, F&B cost will play well, and then we will get into the wage cost in the next seminar. With that, Caroline, I'm good.
Thank you so much, Nish. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions and answers. So if everybody just wants to go ahead and drop any questions in the chat, you can also raise your hand and I will unmute you if you want to give your question live to us. Again, you can ask literally anything, so it doesn't have to be about food cost, but it can be whatever you've been curious about. We did have a question in the chat earlier. Somebody said, hi, I want to understand food and beverage cost better and how to compute that metric. And so I'm just going to go back to that slide and maybe we can just run through it one more time.
Yeah, so I'll take it. So essentially, food cost, how we derive the calculation is ending inventory from prior month plus any addition, which would be any new purchases, minus the closing inventory, which is the most recent inventory, minus adjustments. So forget the adjustments part, right? So essentially, we're not taking just your purchases alone as your cost of goods sold. We definitely recommend having the inventory, like Nish mentioned, at least doing the 80-20 rule, right? So it's, again, pretty simple. Value of closing inventory from prior month, addition, which would be the new purchases. So that's an addition, minus the closing inventory of the current month. And then you divided that by your total revenue, right? But also you can do the same thing for food. If you're just taking the food inventory, you can take the food inventory plus any new food purchases minus closing food inventory, divide that by total food revenue, for example, right? So you can identify each category separately as well.
Yeah, so I'll just, let me see. I think we got one more question in the chat. Oh, sorry. This person said they meant that they wanted to figure out how to do the theoretical cost versus the actual cost.
Yeah, so I think so theoretical cost is, for that you have to follow the recipe cost, which Ruhel shared as a template. So once you do the recipe cost, and recipe cost is a pretty big discussion on its own, where you might have to do a batch costing, you might have a sauce costing separately, which you're using in a particular dish. So once you do a recipe cost, you know what is your theoretical food cost. That becomes your target. Like every restaurant, when they open, they're like, we want to achieve 28% food cost because we are a luxury, or lifestyle concept within the hospitality space. But some Peruvian restaurant might say like 31% is an acceptable number for us. And then you do the actual cost. And actual cost, what just Ruhel, discussed before 2 minutes, is you take your opening inventory. If you're doing an inventory, you add your purchases, whatever you bought, minus any transfers from kitchen to the bar, bar to the kitchen, that you do it, and then minus closing inventory. So once you do plus, plus, minus, minus, that we call it consumption. That this is what you consumed last week in order to sell XYZ dollar, or sort of a revenue. And that becomes your actual cost. If your actual cost in, from an accounting world, if it is more than 0.5%, then you have a problem. If it is consistently 3 weeks, 4 weeks consistently, if your cost is off by 0.5% to theoretical cost, then either you have to go back and look at your menu pricing, that, oh, maybe because avocado price has gone up, or seafood price has gone up, but you never change the menu, is the reason why you are struggling to achieve the cost what you want to be. Then change that. Or you have a problem of internal controls or a weak internal controls, which is stopping you from achieving what that number should be. So I hope that answers your question now.
And that person asked if we could send them the calculation of the theoretical in detail. We can definitely do that. And they wanted to know, what is the acceptable theoretical differential for polished casual restaurant?
Yeah. So the next question is, how much little fluctuations do you want to see in inventory month over month seasonality, for example? So it depends on a food or beverage. So I'll take the easy one first, is the beverage. If you are in a, like New York, like summer, the business goes down by, at least 30%, everyone goes to Hamptons and Europe. In that case, you want to burn the shelves, that's what we call. If a lot of people are buying Grey Goose and you have Absolute vodka on the shelf, sell that, adjust your inventory, which helps you from a cash flow perspective. It will not affect your margin. Same with the food. I think food is slightly easier than beverage, because you don't want, if you are in a business where most of the thing is perishable and you are using fresh, you don't want to over order anything. You want to reduce your par level for season. So what we advise the client is reduce your par level as soon as the Memorial Weekend is on, because that's when the sales starts going down, because everyone is away on a holiday, or they are snowbirds. So at least I would say 20% you want to adjust it, free up the cash. So before the season, which is like September, you can use that cash to buy more inventory for the season, which is October, November, December, depending again on where you are.
Awesome. And Taya of Immigrant Foods is asking, how much or how little of fluctuations do you want to see? Sorry, I just lost it. In
Oh,
That
inventory.
was the question that was just answered.
yeah,
Oh, I'm
I
so
just,
sorry. She
sorry,
said,
sorry.
he also asked if we have a template for theoretical versus actual, which we can
So
definitely.
the theoretical is the shit that I went over. That's something that we can provide, right? Also, you have your budgets versus actual as well. So there's a lot of different things that we can do here. So theoretical can be your budget, and we can show you and send you the financial statements that have the theoretical and also an actual, right? So you'll see month over month what you should have had to now what you exactly do have. So that is definitely something that can be possible. Just request us and we'll get it to you.
I'm
Yep.
loving the love from the chat for Janelle and Kieran. Thank you so much for shouting them out.
Thank you so much. It
I'm
means
gonna
a lot.
I'm gonna let Vinny talk. Vinny, you wanted to ask a question. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you
Yep.
now.
All right,
Vinny.
gotcha. So I got a quick question. If the store that we're doing like a weekly inventory, or I mean monthly inventory, I'm sorry, but we get a weekly P&L, would that be affected by the numbers?
Yes. Go ahead, Nish.
Sometime. No, go ahead, Ruhel.
Yeah. Generally speaking, rule of thumbs, we definitely prefer to have the inventory at least for, like Nish said, the 20%, like the high selling, those who want to have on a weekly basis. However, if we cannot do it because doing inventory is labor intensive, right? Monthly does suffice. At the time of sending you the weekly P&L, we just go based on the COGS, or the purchases rather, right? And then at the end of the month, we look at all the adjustments, then we send you the final P&L that indicates all the purchases plus your closing inventory, etc. So, even if you cannot do a full inventory, we would say maybe even a partial if possible. But if not, the monthly is definitely fine. But it's just that the weekly P&L will have only the purchases, nothing else.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And we need the only time the weekly report weekly cost will not make sense. To give you a very simple example, let's say the week ends on 31st October. So sorry, week ends on 30th of October and 31st is Halloween, and you bought a lot of liquor for the party, and because we are not doing inventory, that's going to affect the cost for that particular week. However, what we like to do is we like to see quarterly averages. If your quarterly average stays where it should be, we can always discount 1 week or 2 weeks in isolation because of this bulk purchases you might have done. So that's the only time this will affect your food and beverage cost.
Perfect. I got one more for you.
Sure.
Now, as far as like when we're doing COGS and you're going over the food cost, and when it comes to paper goods, right? When a paper goods cost gets separated by janitorial and actual paper goods, is that something that's done through you guys weekly, or that's another monthly kind of thing? So the weekly report wouldn't be 100% accurate because the janitorial supplies need to be taken off.
Yeah, no, that is true. So weekly report, what we can do, we can take a last 3 months average as a cost. So, if we are doing the weekly P&L, we can actually take a last 3 months average cost. That will give you a good indicator is what is your approximate profit going to be for last week of business.
All right, thank you, man.
No problem.
Thanks, Vinny. I think
All
that's
right.
all. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for all of your time.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.